Thank you so much for joining us today. Good day to everyone. Buenos dias, bonjour. Thank you. We're so thrilled for you to join our teach-in, a joint venture of the Feminist Action Nexus and the Women's Major Group. This teach-in will offer feminists a space to strategize and learn together on the margins of the UN 2022 High-Level Political Forum. I'm Rosa Lizardi. I'm the Global Director of the Feminist Task Force. I'm also the co-convener of the Women's Working Group on Financing for Development, one of the partners of the Feminist Action Nexus. So by way of background, and many of you already know, and I'm seeing some colleagues, some older colleagues and some new colleagues. It's wonderful to see your presence here. Some of you know the Feminist Action Nexus for economic justice and climate justice began in 2021 under the auspices of the Generation Equality Forum, a process which created much anticipation around the action coalitions, a global, innovative, multi-stakeholder partnership created to accelerate gender equality and deliver game-changing results for women and girls. We put forth our feminist vision within this process to create a space where we could bring economic justice action coalition partners and climate action partners together in what we call the Feminist Action Nexus. We put forth our feminist vision to banish the neoclassical fallacies that have led the world to the concentration of wealth and predatory extractivism around nature and resources, which contribute to major crises facing humanity today. We put forth an approach for a fair and gender just system and a new global economic governance architecture to foster systemic reforms, which is urgently needed to ensure meaningful transformation. And learning from the pandemic, we push to promote timely and sufficient anti-crisis policies, sovereign macroeconomic policies, human rights-oriented industrial policies, and fossil fuel-free and responsible environmental policies to promote the well-being for people and the planet. We know that we need to use these spaces to advance the feminist and decolonial global Green New Deal. So we're happy to have you here. For today's session, we have 4 objectives, and let me just review them very quickly. We offer space for shared learning and strategizing among feminists engaged in the high-level political forum, HLPF, for a structural and systemic perspective. We also want to ground collective analysis in a holistic approach, unpacking and advancing interlinkages across the 2030 agenda, including and beyond the SDGs in focus in 2022, which we know SDG 5 is one of those focused on gender equality. We want to reflect on challenges in advancing a systems change agenda in the context of current global crises, including the COVID-19, militarism and conflict, the climate crisis, the macroeconomic inflation crises currently taking place. And we also want to highlight the connections across economic justice and climate justice arenas, contributing to a collective advocacy agenda across this nexus for 2022 and 2023. So we're thrilled that you are here. As you will know, we have a packed agenda where we will be looking at the structural nexus approach across the SDGs in our work. That will come up next. We will also allow for a 2030 agenda check-in and an HLPF update. We will have breakout groups and a good chunk of time to hear from you. and unpack some of these issues. And we will also hear about building this collective advocacy agenda. And then we will close around a messaging around feminists still wanting system change. So at this point, for those who have come in a little bit late, again, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for joining. Please introduce yourself in the chat and raise any questions throughout the session. In the chat, we will be monitoring it. We have interpretation. Please connect with that. Now I want to hand over to our next speakers, Shema Ali from Kanana Association for Sustainable Development, member of the Women's Major Group, and Andrea Vega Troncoso of the Women's Environment and Development Organization, an OP of the Women's Major Group, and also a member of the Feminist Action Nexus. So Shema and Andrea, welcome. Bienvenidas.
Yes, thank you so much.
I hand over to you.
Thank you so much for the introduction. It's really a pleasure to be present today, and thank you so much for your participation. I was thinking how to draft the statement because, in fact, I wanted to create or to highlight the interlinkages between our demands and the current situation and the implications of all the crises recently witnessed on the gender equality and women empowerment in general, but with a focus on my region in particular. So I will not take a lot of time, hopefully. So to start, before the COVID-19 and the current global issues, there were already obstacles that impede women empowerment and the achievement of gender equality in the global South and the Middle East and North Africa region in particular, including, of course, unemployment, the digital divide, the military conflicts in our region, the gender-based violence cases, and exclusion from governance. We were on the way to address these issues before the COVID-19 by providing solutions, include job security, digital transformation, enhancement of women role in peace-building roles and capacities, of course, and also our demands as feminists to have equitable finance for development mechanism and suggesting a robust taxation system from North to Global South, as well as accessing and allowing women to access health services, especially for HIV, AIDS treatment, contraceptives, and sanitary products, and the intergenerational co-leadership for our women in the region. We have been trying to create a room for women of diverse backgrounds to be present in policy-making bodies, despite that the fact that while many countries have signed the compacts and the agreements voicing their support for gender equality, as you all know, they have never created the needed laws and legislations that would protect women as they promised to. But after COVID-19, the intersectionality and issue linkage appeared even more visible for us as feminists, because as COVID-19 has been declared a public health emergency of international concern, this global threat to health security underscored the urgent need to accelerate progress on achieving the SDGs in general. Women of all backgrounds and other vulnerable groups were locked down at homes to be subject to domestic violence and abuse from their husbands and even longer-term abusers, which impacted women's social participation on all levels, as well as their economic welfare. To create a real change, definitely we voiced the reality that there is an urgent need to massively scale up international cooperation in order to deliver on SDGs, especially SDG 5 and its indicators. Given the widespread and multiple implications of the COVID-19 crisis, all sustainable development goals, and particularly those gender-related targets and indicators, were affected. Recognizing this impact and its gendered nature is a critical first step if we need, or if we want really to have equitable recovery period post-COVID-19, and to design socio-economic recoveries that will help not hinder the achievement of the SDGs and gender equality in the global South, especially Arab states. Given also the current further issues and militarization processes we have been witnessing recently to be there is also need for governments to be more accountable for creating this system change as we would like to see it. To be more precise, and in order to convey my message more about the implications of the COVID-19 and the current war on the food systems, especially the accessibility of women to SRH service and the procurement and supply chain processes that were interrupted, as we witnessed many times, that influenced women's economic welfare and progress and their accessibility to basic needs, foods and hygienic products due to the implications on the supply chain management and food system in general. I would like to highlight some facts in relation or creating or enhancing this relation between the SDGs and the relevant indicators of gender equality among SDGs and the implications on women the post-COVID-19. For example, the SDG 5.1 on eliminating all forms of discrimination against women and girls. According to the OECD Social Institutions and Gender Index, new legislation to enhance gender equality and abolish discriminatory laws have benefited from increasing political commitments before 2019. However, the COVID-19 and the current political changes have crippled the legislative systems in our countries, hindering many government abilities to pass and implement new legislation for women empowerment. On SDG 5.2, for example, on elimination of all violence against women and girls, while recent data shows that 18% of women have experienced physical and or sexual partner violence in the previous 2 years, new evidence shows that domestic violence have increased, especially under lockdowns, as stated before, and in the countries with protracted humanitarian conflict, protracted humanitarian situations and contexts. And of course, is the longer-term conflict, especially in Middle East and North Africa. On SDG 5.3 on elimination of all harmful practices before 2020, evidence showed a decline in the practice of child marriage in Arab states, South Asia, and Sub-Saharan Africa. However, as poverty increased now in the wake of a pandemic and the current armament processes, and of course the allocations of finances to militarization and the eruption of new conflicts and the high rates of poverty, child, early and forced marriages, which often stem from economic considerations under extreme poverty, increased in developing countries, especially in Arab region. On SDG 5.4 on recognizing unpaid care and domestic work, prior to the COVID-19 outbreak, women were already performing 75% of the household and care work globally. The present crisis has highlighted the importance of carers who take care of the older members of society, as well as those with existing health issues. Moreover, in many places, schools have closed, and we are witnessing now also a new wave of the COVID-19, and we don't know how it will have implications on adults and girls especially, meaning that the children will be staying at home, and women might be staying again at home. These dynamics and all that comes with them increase the time burden of unpaid care work for women especially. It will likely be very challenging to return to the pre-crisis distribution of labor and nearly impossible to achieve an unequitable distribution of unpaid care and domestic work between men and women by 2030 as was promised. On SDG 5.6, meaning ensuring access to sexual and reproductive health and reproductive rights, provision of sexual and reproductive health commodities, including menstrual health items, was impacted heavily as supply chains were, of course, stopped for some time. Evidence, for example, from the Zika crisis in Latin America showed that gang violence increased in this region, same as GBV in Arab states, and honor killing, as well as unwanted pregnancies and unsafe abortion operations. So from all this, what has been stated, I would like to just summarize what we need. And I think there are just very few suggestions, and we believe that we will come up with more, I would say, comprehensive agenda by end of our meeting. I believe that based on this, what we need now is changes the system entirely in terms of legislation, governance structure, human rights reporting mechanisms to have better women voices in these mechanisms, and the economic assistance systems that targeting women and of course all vulnerable groups. We need also to see more equitable finance for development systems in order to overcome the social and structural barriers we have in order to enable women networks and alliances to perform and alleviate at least some of those impacts which were stated on women regionally and globally. We need also more focused feminist dimension in the peace building processes, so women can have a strengthened role in peacemaking processes in general and beyond these peacemaking processes in the government structure later on in their countries. There are just a few of the demands, and I believe that we are sharing them together. And this is the end of my statement, and thank you so much for your attention. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Shaima. Those were super helpful as an overview of where we're at with the 2030 agenda. I'm going to talk maybe a bit more about the HLPF specifically. I was asked to talk about SDG 5 and 17 in the Ministerial Declaration, which is the outcome document of the high-level political forum. And then also just some updates from the Women's Major Group on what we're up to here on the ground in New York, what we've been doing and what we're advocating for. So I'm first of all really glad as part of both, I'll introduce myself, I'm Andrea. I work at WeDo. I'm part of the Women's Major Group Secretariat, but WeDo is also one of the co-conveners for this Feminist Action Nexus initiative. So as part of both, I'm kind of really glad that we're putting them together. Because if we're talking about achieving the SDGs, we need to talk about canceling debt. We need to talk about ending austerity and changing our unjust global economic system, which is our demand for today for the Women's Major Group at HLPF. So to speak a bit more about this HLPF, each year a number of SDGs or Sustainable Development Goals are in focus at the forum. So 2 of the SDGs under review this year are number 5 on gender equality and 17 on partnerships and means of implementation. So as the Women's Major Group, and my colleague Rina will talk more about this later on and share some concrete proposals, we see all of the Sustainable Development Goals, especially these 2, as cross-cutting. We don't think they should be siloed. We don't think we should be cherry picking just a select amount of them to review at HLPF, but we think all of them should be reviewed more holistically. This is part of our systemic approach and our demands for system change. We can't achieve one SDG without achieving the other, especially when we talk about gender, as we know as feminists. So where are we at with SDG 5 and 17 in the Ministerial Declaration, which is again the outcome document of the HLPF. It's negotiated in part before HLPF, and then during the forum, it's put under something called a silence procedure, which essentially means that if there's any red lines, if any member states are like, this cannot be in the document, they break the silence. Oftentimes the silence is broken to roll back on language, so usually it's not a great sign. But right now, when we talk about SDG 5 and 17, these SDGs, the way the Ministerial Declaration works is that they're usually, again, siloed into separate paragraphs and not integrated more holistically across the text. However, this year, for this Ministerial Declaration, we were able to keep gender both in the opening and the closing paragraphs, which is really great, and just a step more towards more gender mainstreaming. But it's still an issue that they're siloed into separate paragraphs. So for SDG 5, the last time the gender equality goal was reviewed was in 2017. And so far for this Ministerial Declaration, we have better language than we did back in 2017 when it was last reviewed. So there's the phrase multiple and intersecting forms of discrimination, which is really exciting that that stayed in the text. As well as sexual and gender-based violence was included in the SDG 5 paragraphs. For SDG 17, which again is the one on means of implementation, this paragraph is a bit less strong than we'd hoped, of course, same with gender, but There's a word, there's phrases focusing on partnerships, a lot of language focusing on partnerships, but without recognizing the power imbalances in those partnerships. As we well know, there's a difference between global North, global South countries. We need to be talking about power in this situations and multilateral negotiations, and that recognition of power imbalance is not in the text, unfortunately. We also wanted more emphasis on means of implementation and a real commitment to action. And unfortunately, in this regard, the SDG 17 language is not as strong as we'd hoped. So some things that we're doing or that we did about this, because now we're reaching the end of the HLPF, and the ministerial declaration will be hopefully adopted on Monday at the high level segment that closes the forum. So some things we're doing. We've spoken to several allied member states. So when the ministerial declaration is adopted, states can give expressions of opinion. So naturally, states like Russia are usually the ones to do this, more conservative states. And usually they just say like, we don't agree with the gender paragraphs, or like, we like are not happy with this language. This is not agreed, like whatever, like they make a final comment of that sort. And what we are hoping, and we asked allied member states to do, who are champions of gender equality, we asked them to please speak up when a state says that and express their opinion that of the importance of gender equality and of the importance of being more progressive and being more action oriented when it comes to these paragraphs. So just to move then to some of the other key issues we're facing is of course inefficiency and bureaucracy of the UN, the real limitations on civil society engagement and participation. We were hoping to make an exhibition that was not possible due to some bureaucratic things. But what's new, we will always have to deal with, unfortunately, a UN that is inefficient, that places real limitations and systemic barriers to activist participation. Especially, we were hoping that perhaps there would be more options for hybrid modality and different ways to participate. For example, side events, you're charged a lot if you would want to make them hybrid. So we're just hoping for more inclusivity in that regard. And then of course we have the voluntary national reviews, which are happening this week. The voluntary national reviews are conducted by member states, again on a voluntary basis, but they're essentially a review of the progress or not progress on the sustainable development goals in that country. You can find the countries presenting on the HLPF website. Some of our criticism on the VNRs is that they're usually like tourism commercials. They really don't paint a picture of the reality in that country. There's 2-minute intervention, 1 2-minute intervention for all of civil society to organize a statement together. And it's done through, again, the women's major group is a major group. So we have a major groups and other stakeholders coordination mechanism. So within that coordination mechanism, all of the different major groups and all of the civil society of that country have to draft one statement, 2 minutes long, that one person delivers. So there's, again, not a lot of space. And of course, there's the issue of intimidation that we faced year after year. That has become a problem this year, again, with some states intimidating the folks who give the VNR intervention on behalf of civil society. So voluntary national reviews, VNRs are a tool, but ultimately we do have to think of these like, this is not real accountability. Like these are not any binding commitments. As I said, they're often formulated as if they were sort of tourism commercials. And this is part of really what we're grappling with as the women's major group. And I think this connects back to the Feminist Action Nexus work, because part of what we're asking ourselves is, what does real accountability mean to us? What does it look like? And I think with the voluntary national reviews, we need to be thinking about this, because year after year we have them and we're finding that they're not a real mechanism for accountability. So on some positive notes, and I'll be wrapping up soon, I wanted to reflect, we have one official major groups and other stakeholders official session that's in the actual program of the high-level political forum, and it happens in conference room 4, which is one of like the big conference rooms, not like the smaller conference rooms for the side events where they usually put us in. And I think that was a really beautiful moment. I had only seen the major groups and other stakeholders official session virtually before. This one was titled Visions from Civil Society. And it was just really beautiful to see an official session in an official UN program that is led for and by activists and civil society. And it was just really beautiful to see us take over the UN like that, be on all of the panelists like seats. And it was just a really powerful image. And as you know, we have this color campaign. Today is purple, and this is our demands. And that day we were wearing green, and we have green scarves when we're in person. I wish I had one now to show you, but we filled the room with like green scarves, and it was really engaging because we did have a lot of member states speak and give their thoughts from the floor. But yeah, we're just at a moment with the women's major group where we're really thinking about new strategies and existing political strategies and solutions that have been working for us. I think this is having sessions in the official program and being allowed to take over the UN like that is really exciting. And I wish we had that in more spaces, thinking ahead to the SDG summit that's happening next year, which has been happening every 4 years. I think the last one was in 2019. So we're really hoping for a space like that in that moment. So yeah, we're just at a moment, as Shaima was saying, where Agenda 2030, we're in some ways worse off than we were before. We have a global pandemic, we have increasing inequalities. So as the feminist movement, across movements, we need to be really thinking about like the HLPF and the SDGs are an important tool, but those are not the things that are bringing us out of crises and our systems of oppression and bringing about real transformative change. So I think spaces like these, the work that, for example, the Feminist Action Nexus is doing to really have strategy meetings, to really create spaces for movement, to talk to each other, to think of solutions, systemic solutions, is really the answer. But yeah, the HLPF and the SDGs are an important tool because that holistic nature of Agenda 2030 allows us to bring our feminist structural analysis and calls for systemic change. And just really quickly, I'll share a few things in the chat before I pass the floor to my next colleague. I'll just share our social media toolkit. Even though there's 2 days left, you can join us in our digital advocacy. We also just released an article as the Women's Major Group on IISD's SDG News platform titled "To Achieve the SDGs, we need to center human rights." So we're really emphasizing this human rights approach. And yeah, I invite you to really join us in strategizing on what being in movements in times like these looks like. And without further ado, I'll pass it to Anne from Femnet and the Feminist Action Nexus.
Thank you so much, Andrea. Thank you, Katie and Shaima. So for me, my name is Anne Songole. I'm the Climate Justice Coordinator at Femnet, the African Women's Development and Communications Network. And I'm also a co-convener of the Feminist Action Nexus on economic and climate justice, and I'm based in Nairobi, Kenya. And so I'll be reflecting basically on the role of feminist movements in pushing for systems change, and then now thinking about the importance of structural analysis and challenges in advancing the approach. And I'll also bring in what the work of the Nexus is doing in this regard. So I just wonder if anyone remembers the Millennium Development Goals. You know, they lapsed in 2015. they only, they applied to developing countries, I think. They didn't link, to the issues that were on the ground, or, to the complexities of human rights. And they were also very limited in terms of their targets, and had targets on, education, gender parity in education, and maternal mortality, which of course were issues of the time. And so, unfortunately, just as Andrea was saying, both the MDGs and the SDGs, they really fare similarly when it comes to accountability, because it's a lot of states really resist the language on accountability, and would actually like to see words like follow-up, review, over things like accountability. And so already we are seeing that is power, and resisting accountability in diplomatic spaces is a norm. It's something that we're seeing a lot. In the climate space, we also know even last year during the COP26, we saw a lot of the language, on the fossil fuels issues being watered down. And so we come back to now issues of gender and feminism. And so we know gender is an effect of culture. So when we think about gender is maybe a bit more acceptable than words like feminism, but we know that feminism is intellectual. It's a commitment. It's an intellectual commitment and a political movement. And so we think about how that feminism really just evolved, where initially it meant, the qualities. It actually referred to qualities of females, and then now there was the fact that it evolved to be something where were believing in equal rights as as a part of equality of the sexes. And then at that point there are also a lot of movements and ideologies that now shaped it into now what it's becoming, a development agenda. And so it's thinking about the political movements of the 60s and 70s, the first, second wave, and now right now when we're thinking about identity, which is really important, we are seeing that it's something to do with the struggles that we are having. But when we go back, when we think also about feminism in Africa, there are certain aspects of feminism that are linked to liberation struggles. But when now we started having a lot of conversations about development, that was now during solidifying these discussions during the UN Decade for Women between 1975 and 1985, we saw a lot of what this feminism really means. And for Africa, of course, it's a response to the global systemic inequality. And so even as we're thinking about the SDGs, we need to think differently. And of course, Africa is always resisting the kind of neoliberal capitalism that we're already seeing at the moment. And that's also an aspect of power. So coming back to Africa, we had the Feminist Charter adopted, and this was, during the MDGs, but before the SDGs. And we saw that it gave some good principles about how we need to think about leadership, feminist leadership, and, feminist approaches, whether you're doing a project, whether, you're working in a UN agency, wherever it is, it's now about what are some of these accountability principles. And so the Feminist Action Nexus on economic and climate justice, which we co-convene, is we think when we look at SDGs, we think about some of the structural issues surrounding SDGs. And so it's first of all the acknowledgement that development sits within an economic system that's really patriarchal and extractivist. And saying extractivist just also means that there's a lot of colonialism in this particular era. And so we're also looking at the SDGs not taking into account some of those structural issues that were being mentioned earlier. For instance, like thinking through a transformational approach to these economic and social structures. And the SDGs also don't think about newer models that are more inclusive, but they think they really promote a lot of traditional economic models. And these models usually prioritize growth over other things that are just equally important. They also, as Andrea just said, they don't address structural power relations. Then, the goals are very silent on collective action, issues of, peace and security, and, just many aspects of human rights. And I know, I'm not sure that is something that has changed. And looking also at women's participation with goal 5, it really seemed tokenist, but we're seeing a lot of changes in this regard, but still we need to see a little bit more. And then, of course, the SDGs are silent on implementation. And so, what are some of the structural tools in our hands? Because those definitely are challenges of the processes that you're already in. So some of the tools that are in our hand, I can really fully talk about the Feminist Action Nexus and what we're looking at. And this is, an intersection of climate justice and gender justice. And of course, our vision is about an economy that really shifts from an emphasis on being productive to one that we call a feminist decolonial Green New Deal. This one was really discussed during the launch of the Nexus in April. And there's also, we're thinking about an economy that puts human rights and well-being over all other things. And I think that's really important because at the moment our focus is really on growth and GDP. Then we also want to promote an equitable and just global trade order. Then there's aspects of redistributing wealth and resources. Then there's also an economy that promotes, debt justice and a new structure for sovereign debt. We know what debt is doing, especially to some of the countries that are worst affected by the climate crisis. And of course, we would like global economic governance architecture that's democratic. And I'd also mention just another tool that I know a lot of African feminists have been using, and that's the Charter. With that, we need to think critically also about the people who've gone before us and their ideologies. And instead of starting afresh, we build on what's already done. Already, that's what the Feminist Action Nexus is doing. And I think it's just important for us to really take a long, hard look at some of the issues that we're facing right now. The VNRs are a really good tool if used nationally to think about, what's already being done and who are the actors in the sector. But I think feminist organizations, civil society organizations really need to rally together to think through how they would want to push for accountability. And some of these, a society that is really just, using, feminist analysis to make sure that we achieve this. So I think I'll stop there for now. I hope you heard me and thank you.
Thank you so much, Anne. That was a really wonderful overview of the kind of thinking and the history and the trajectory behind this kind of approach. So we're very grateful to you for that. And we're pleased to be joined by Wardarina from APWLD, who's going to talk us through some of the work that the Women's Major Group has done on an approach that really honors the kind of original interlinkages of the 2030 agenda, which was so amazing in how it was initially created. So Rina, if you're ready, over to you, and thanks so much.
Hello, hi everyone. Thank you so much for having me here, and I'm really enjoy, listening also to the previous intervention. I just really want to highlight, how the Women Major Group has been, and I think will be, right? The strong feminist force to push for gender equality, combating inequality between and within countries, and demanding for system change. And then when I prepare myself for today's session, I actually came across many strong Women Major Group statements. So if we look into the SDGs and then how we work, and then even before when it's called SDG, we call it post-2015 development agenda, right? So I remember that time in March 2013 in the HLP. So it's not HLPF, it's the high level meeting of eminent person on the post-2015 in Bonn. is actually Women Major Group released a statement that say that we will not be mainstream into a polluted stream, which gives really a critique on the notion of gender mainstreaming only, without addressing the failure of the current patriarchal neoliberal development model that really root in the unsustainable production and consumption, and then also exacerbate gender, race, and class inequalities. So that time, Women Major Group was very, very strong. We call for a deep and structural change to existing global system of power, decision making, and resource sharing. Another one. So in after 2013, and then there was a discussion, and then there's an open working group process around 2014, and then on the conclusion of the open working group process in July 2014, Women Major Group has women's 8 red flags. So we released a statement about our 8 flags on the SDG. It really covered the systemic issue that remain that have the proposed SDG that time still not sufficiently ambitious or transformative or right-based. So this includes, for instance, the issue of absence of human rights, the concern of partnership with partnerships, you know, that time that's what they call it. And then how the SDGs give green lights given to private sector financing and partnership for sustainable development without any specific language on evaluation, accountability, transparency, and overall governance. We also talk about how SDGs are not really sufficiently addressing the concentration of power and wealth imbalances that deepen poverty and inequalities within and between countries. We gave a very concrete recommendation that time, that ranging from tackling historical responsibilities and historical debt. We said about we need to reform global trade and finance agenda. And really, we want to have a total shift of economy that really depends on women unpaid and underpaid work and relied on the systemic discrimination of women, right? In 2016, we do it again. We have we release a fact sheet on systemic barriers. We highlight the importance of really institutionalizing space within the follow-up and review process and the HLPF to address systemic issues and systemic barriers, because it's not discussed in the Agenda 2030 itself. We say that, among other, the systemic barriers are patriarchy and fundamentalisms, for instance, land and resource distribution, militarism and conflict, unjust trade and investment agreement, and then also wealth concentration and corporate power. So we said that time, why not making HLPF theme every year to address this issue, right? Why not actually looking at the progress of the SDGs and then see whether that these systemic barriers is actually hindering the achievement of each of the SDGs. So in the backdrop of the HLPF or ECASO review, which was happened in 2020 and 2021, Women Major Group actually released our concrete proposal and recommendation. So summary of our recommendation is actually consistent with what we had before. One is that we want to have more focus on discussing systemic barriers in achieving SDGs. So HLPF should really, really clearly expose both progress and implementation gaps at national, regional, and global level in order to really know what kind of policy that we need to make, right? What are the corrective action that we need to do? So we actually want to have a deeper discussion, deeper analysis. HLPF need to ensure that we have adequate analysis of the root causes and systemic barriers of slow progress in all the areas. We also say that, hey, the cluster goals, the way that you siloed, you making all this, conversation about SDGs siloed is not working, right? It's not only blocking the advance on the effective implementation of the interlinkages, but also blocking the generation of knowledge and tools for transformative work. So we demanded that time, we need to have systemic annual comprehensive review of the SDG. What does it mean? We want to actually have all the SDG discussed every year. Yeah. So, but why we are saying that our argument that time is very, very clear. One, usually, especially in my region, yeah, from Asia, in Asia and the Pacific, governments primarily work and report only on the SDGs that really under review that year. So it's really concerning, although that UNDESA report might not, say that way, but again, the government only usually just report on that cluster goals. And then also we felt that the comprehensive review also require greater attention to an integration of wider inputs, including by diverse civil society organization, members of affected communities, and also include the reports by the special rapporteurs and independent experts. This is very important, we felt that time. We also say that the HLPF must change from a space to passively report to a space to actively review and act, meaning that we need to actually ask the hard question, the difficult question, why the SDGs is not working, what kind of issue that is actually hindering that, and then also have a more in-depth analysis and reporting on human rights and systemic challenges to sustainable development. The other one is to increase the role and the role of regional forum and improve linkages between the national, regional, and global levels. This is also something that we strongly believe that we cannot see this SDG is only 2 weeks of the HLPF, 2-week-long process in the UN headquarters in New York, but as a sustained and connected year-long process of follow-up and review, and use this mechanism at the national, regional, and global level. I just want to add, lastly, I hope I still have the time, in relation with the concrete proposal from us, from the Women Major Group, and we are still going to push for this, I think. For our concrete proposal for the theme and format of the HLPF, that time that we put, for the HLPF review, we say that we want the theme of the remaining cycle of the HLPF is actually built on the broader theme of building back transformatively, right? That's supposed to be the overarching theme. But what does it mean? We know that that time there was like 3 years left. We want the first year, to actually talk about how to address the inequalities of wealth. So we want to have the theme of building back differently, transforming to a just global economic governance, which prioritize underlying macroeconomic, financial, and trade structural injustices and inequalities, and then also social protection, trade, debt, illicit financial flow, and corporate capture. The second year, we want to tackle the issue of inequalities of power. So we propose a theme of building back justly, which means reducing inequality and sustaining peace and building back sustainably. So this theme is really looking to the intersection of development and peace, tackling the issue of discrimination, racism, patriarchy, fundamentalism, heightened militarism, corporate captures, and colonialism. And then the third one is tackling climate change and sustainable use of natural resources by the theme of building back sustainably. So this is our proposal that time. And then we also said that to do that, we need to actually have all the goals to be discussed, yeah, and then to see how those systemic barriers is actually affecting that all the goals. And then to do that, we said that you can actually do it. From 8 days of the HLPF, we promote to increase it to 11 days. And then we also have a very, very concrete proposal on how the HLPF should look like. So I hear a voice, I think that maybe my time is up. So I'm going to stop there. And then, we'll be happy to answer any question if there's any. Thank you so much, Katie.
Thank you so much, Rina, for reminding us of all of that amazing work that's been done for years now, and for the kind of initial vision we had of how the HLPF really could have been a transformative space for gender, for development justice, and for so many other issues. So we will take these visions forward and make sure that they inform the advocacy that we're doing in these spaces. So just in case I haven't introduced myself, my name is Katie Tobin. I work at We Do as a coordinator of the Feminist Action Nexus for Economic and Climate Justice. And we're also very proud to be a member of the Women's Major Group. So what we're going to do for our remaining 11 minutes together is share back a little bit of the kind of tools and ideas that we came up with in the breakout groups. And to get that process started, I'm going to just share a couple resources. I'll talk you through them and put them in the chat, and then hand over to my colleague Almudena from the Women's Major Group to kind of talk us through next steps and a little bit of analysis before we then hand over to Amelia Reyes to close. So we know, and this came up in our group too, that so much work has been done. Rena shared some of it, Shaima shared some analysis, Andrea updated us on the Women's Major Group and walked us through it. And we think it's really important to build on that work rather than reinvent the wheel. So just to share a couple things that are out there, Andrea already mentioned the Women's Major Group position paper. Well, let me share the other part of my screen, 1 second. Okay, so this is the Women's Major Group, excuse me, position paper for this year. And it has some really important analysis in it, a vision for a structural approach, systems change, a lot of work we can build on. I think sometimes we forget after the HLPF that we actually have these amazing resources that we pull together for it each year that are also useful in other spaces. So that's one. We'll share the link in the chat again. And then there's a piece of work that I think is super important and didn't receive perhaps enough attention outside our sort of feminist activist circles, which was the work that happened in advance of the Generation Equality Forum to really think through, you know, what a sort of normative accountability approach to the 25th anniversary of the Beijing Conference on Women should actually mean, and kind of before it devolved into a moment for donors to kind of make commitments and flashy statements, it actually also brought together a lot of amazing feminists, several of whom are here with us today, to think through, you know, what is our agenda 25 years after Beijing laid out a really comprehensive agenda for women's rights and gender equality that we know has not been fulfilled. And so for the Action Nexus, this is very much a lamppost or a sort of, I don't know the expression, but a real anchor for our analysis that we hope to build on. And as you can see, the work addresses climate change and democracy, authoritarianism, sexual violence, corporate capture, a lot of the issues that have been coming up in a really comprehensive way. So I'll share that link as well. And then just also to share that the Feminist Action Nexus, which is this newer initiative that we've been talking about, has pulled together key demands based on the work that was done last year on a feminist and decolonial global Green New Deal, on a human rights approach to private sector engagement, since we know that that's the direction the multilateral system is going in. And while we don't like it, we want to make sure that we're making our voices clear on how it could be done in a way that upholds and fulfills the rights of women, girls, gender diverse people, and people in general. And then looking at other things like the Feminist COVID-19 Collective, the Mexico City Declaration, we've kind of ended up with these 7 key demands. And the sort of full list is available on our website in English, French, and Spanish, and we hope to expand to other languages as well. So maybe I'll stop there. I'll hand over to Almudena, and then we'll see if we have a couple minutes for inputs before we finish with Amelia. So Almudena, thank you, and over to you.
Muchísimas gracias, Katie. Muchísimas gracias a todas. Voy a ser muy rápida porque el tiempo se nos acaba. Nosotras, bueno, queríamos compartir sobre todo desde el Women's Major Group y desde la entidad en la que trabajo, ¿no?, la importancia de trabajar sobre todo desde esta visión holística desde este enfoque holístico e interseccional que nos permite enfrentar realmente las barreras sistemáticas, las barreras estructurales que generan las discriminaciones y opresiones. Y ahí sí me gustaría compartir con vosotras, en mi caso, en el caso de la entidad en la que trabajo como expertas en derechos sexuales y reproductivos, nosotras entendemos que los vínculos y la interconexión y la visión holística es principal. Es decir, nosotras entendemos que la lucha por los derechos sexuales y reproductivos es una lucha sobre todo por acabar y por transformar con el sistema económico neoliberal austericida. Teniendo muy claro esto, teniendo muy claro esa posición y también teniendo muy claro que hay que huir siempre de la lógica binaria patriarcal que diferencia entre luchas identitarias y entre luchas materiales, porque todas las luchas identitarias son materiales, entendemos que desde estos dos puntos diferentes nos permite trabajar desde la unión de todos los colectivos, la unión de todas las diferentes luchas y la unión de las diferentes agendas, procesos y espacios de generación de producción de política, tanto lo local como lo global. Y esto es importante porque el momento es crítico, es un momento, estamos mucho peor que en el año 2015 y ahora es el momento de ser generosos y de conectar todas las luchas y todas las diferentes agendas para poder conseguir cambios sistemáticos. Y en ese caso también hablábamos de la importancia que también lo es para el Women's Major Group, de trabajar desde un enfoque de coherencia de política feminista, ¿no? Y en la dimensión vertical de este enfoque de coherencia de políticas feministas es muy importante unir los ODS, unir la Agenda 2030 de Desarrollo Sostenible con los mecanismos de protección de derechos humanos, tanto con los tratados internacionales, que son vinculantes, pero así como con otros procedimientos especiales, ¿no? Y sobre todo, y voy muy rápido, voy a finalizar porque no queda tiempo, resaltar la importancia de la creación, de la generación de alianzas estratégicas entre movimientos de justicia climática, movimientos de mujeres, de trabajadoras domésticas y de cuidados, movimientos por la justicia sexual, movimientos antirracistas, unir ahora mismo todas las luchas desde esta visión holística. Y para terminar, sí quisiera resaltar que, por ejemplo, la lucha por la justicia climática, está claro que el vínculo es con la justicia económica, por supuesto, pero también en nuestra narrativa ya hemos incorporado que no habrá justicia climática sin justicia de género. Yo creo que hay que ir mucho más allá y decir que no habrá justicia climática sin justicia sexual. Muchas veces se nos olvida que la soberanía corporal, que la violencia contra los cuerpos de las mujeres y de la población LGTBIQ+, sirve para imponer agendas autoritarias que les permiten imponer agendas neoliberales austericidas. Por lo tanto, incorporar el resto de movimientos sociales, la lucha de los colectivos LGTBIQ+, y por la soberanía y autodeterminación corporal, creo que es importante y nos permite ser mucho más transformadores y poder acabar con este sistema económico neoliberal que nos está violentando a todos cada día de manera más fuerte. Paso la palabra a Katie. Muchas gracias a todas por escucharme.
Muchas gracias, Almudena, for those really important points and for the connecting of so many of the issues that we work on. Thank you. To close us out, I'm turning over to my colleague, Amelia Reyes. And Amelia works in many of these spaces, including at the national level in Mexico and as part of the Women's Major Group, as well as being a co-convener of the Feminist Action Nexus. So thank you, Amelia, and over to you.
Thank you so much. And thank you to my colleagues and everybody who joined. We can see the interest and the awareness as well of making all of these connections. And this is just part of a small effort to try to bridge in the gaps, but there are many more. So I think it's very good to start of what we have as feminist movement, as collectives in different spaces trying to strengthen our actions. And I also want to say what is missing. because I think moving forward, in one of our groups, it was mentioned that we need to also be very critical of what we have done, because the challenges are so big, and maybe we need to also try to reinvent ourselves, not reinvent the fights, the contents, but also the ways that we are proceeding. And I think, first of all, I think we need to start having a more crucial engagement with indigenous peoples movement. We haven't done that, and maybe this was a good opportunity in HLPF. I don't think we have missed that chance, but also towards different processes, it would be really important to try to bring them to the forefront. And secondly, I'd say we had been very anthropocentric in our analysis, and I think it's time that even the feminist economy, the structural analysis, we have been focusing on caring for people. It is time also that we start talking about caring for life, as the Feminist Action Nexus is trying to do, to try to make these connections between the well-being of people and the health of the planet. And that also, I think, comes with revisiting some of the work that ecology economists are doing now. And that is a new field. It's not new, but it's new to us. I think we are disconnected, but they are saying things that we can recognize there. And I'm just gonna say very bluntly, first of all, that to fight for the health of the planet and to fight for environmental sustainability is to fight against the capitalistic system. I don't think we have that clarity into saying that the solution to solving the environmental problem is to dismantle capitalism. It is as clear as that. So whomever who wants to find solutions in the green proposals, well, they're wrong, because precisely what economic ecologists have been saying is that in all of the modeling they have done, thousands and thousands of modeling, there is not one single scenario in which green pacts, green models, Green New Deals, without having this structural points of entry behind, none of them will lead to the restructuring of life and the conservation and the preservation of life in this planet. So we are in a very dire moment. So I'd say we should also expand our minds to try to read what these thinkers are working. And of course, that needs our feminist analysis. They are not going through an analysis of care and how these multiple and intersectional discriminations are happening. So that is where we come in. But also as well, I think it is really important that we take a bolder step. And that is to start to calling out really strongly the responsibles, such as our colleagues today in the ECE group are doing. I think this is what we need to expect more. And the Women's Major Group and other feminist groups have always promoted differentiated actions, but we need that more than ever. And that means differentiated actions for the Global South down to those in the Global North. We need to push our Global North colleagues. We need to find differentiated actions, and we need to find ways in which we can support them in being bolder, in being more direct and straightforward, and maybe to come up with even radical solutions. And instead of looking out to the South, thinking that they're helping the world just by having a presence in our territories, when the fight, the bigger fight, the stronger fight needs to be fought in their territories with their decision makers, with their citizens, because we are seeing a rise of fascism all around the Global North, and that needs to stop. I'm not saying there's not fascism in our territories, but the one that happens in the North impacts us all. So there is a very major fight to be had, and that is related because fundamentalisms are the source precisely to build on this capitalistic system that is predatory and is extractive. And just finally want to close with another agenda that I think we need to explore, which is the capping of material resource use. And that goes parallel with capping energy use. Why am I saying this? Because all of the extractive industries such as minerals or food systems or anything from avocado, which is now in Mexico, is linked to a huge battle with the narcos, with the organized crime, to copper, to lithium that is now shifting globally. every product is linked to an extractive industry. So far we have only dealt with the extractive industry where it is, and now we have an agenda that we need to go more broadly and to say we need to cap material resource use for the global north, and second, inside, capping material resource use for the richest in the global north. And that can allow us to go sectorially, nationally, regionally. And to me, it's like an eye-opener, because finally we could fight the entire extractive industry. But that means that we need to be prepared to engage with different platforms where we haven't been, to learn more. And I'd say this is the missing piece that we had, because economically and ecologically, this is the point of entry that makes the most sense. By capping material resource use, meaning by capping extraction, you're also capping energy use, which is precisely what is rising the temperatures globally. So just wanted to say there are so many things, so many exciting things, I think, for me to learn, but also to share and then to strategize. This is just a starting point. So we very much look forward to keep on engaging with all of you in mobilizing, in finding what are the powerful things that you are doing back home, how we can engage, how we can support, and at the same time, how can we learn together to expand the potential of our movements, because we are entering into very risky moments, but this is also a very worthy moment to fight for a beautiful planet. So thank you so much.